Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Luffy learns Haki early? Part 2, subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I do not own this fanfic, and also make sure to check out the author of this fanfic, J.R.R. Toast, and support him for writing this awesome fanfic. Link is in the description. Let's begin this story. Luffy swam like his life depended on it. He wanted to see the forest up close. Plus, he could probably hunt for food once he made it, especially if the forest was as big as it looked from there. He was pretty hungry. The shore quickly came into view, and the teen slowed down as he approached. The nice thing about the boat sinking was Luffy and Zoro now had nothing to dock. Plus, they had just finished the last of the food. The only thing either of them had brought, worth keeping, was Zoro's katana. Thinking back on it, Luffy swore he could sometimes hear it talking to Zoro, but he never figured out if he was just hearing things. If he wasn't, he had a feeling that what was being said was only for the swordsman's ear. Luffy's feet finally found sand, and the water became more shallow as he approached the beach. He walked out of the ocean, the waves crashing behind his feet, and the teenager acted like he was doing nothing wrong as he headed toward the throngs of people occupying the street. Because he wasn't. There was nothing wrong with swimming onto an island, as far as he was aware. There were many people going about their various activities for the day, from shopping to working, and some just enjoying the coast. Continuing to make his way down the street, he noticed several different stalls selling different colored stones shaped like the moon. Well, the moon sometimes. He thought he remembered Makino calling it a waning crescent back when he was her student. Luffy looked on those memories fondly. He wasn't the best at learning, but Makino had always been patient with him. As he passed yet another stall selling the stones, he curiously eyed one of them, and couldn't help but wonder what they were all about. Finding himself too curious after passing the stall number he couldn't even count, the boy approached one of the women selling the, apparently popular, moon-shaped rocks. "Excuse me, miss," said Luffy, getting the stall owner's attention. Yes, young man. Is there something you see that interests you?" she asked in a grandmotherly tone, gesturing to the wares that were being sold. "I was actually curious about these," he replied, picking up one of the moon-shaped rocks and examining it. There was nothing really special about it. Just some porous stone carved into a curious shape. "Well, you see, that shape you're holding in your hand is actually the shape of this city," the old stall owner answered. Her words surprised Luffy. Why would someone want to make a city in the shape of the moon? Well, the moon sometimes. When he thought about it though, it was actually kind of cool. The woman turned and looked toward the large trees behind her. "It was by no one's choice that our city took this shape. All of the land that could be used for building has been taken up. The trees you see in the distance have proved to be infallible for any who have tried. They're what make the city take the shape it does." The old shopkeeper paused in thought as she gazed at the trees. There's an old legend about how this island came to be. Actually, it wasn't a very well-known story, and it was quite fantastical, so she enjoyed telling it. It's said that long ago there lived a woman more beautiful than any in the world. When the woman turned around to continue her storytelling, she noticed that the young boy she'd been talking to was no longer there. "Young man." She spoke quizzically into the empty air in front of her. She sighed to herself, realizing he was gone for good. Young people these days can't wait for anything. A shame really, it was a wonderful story. Luffy couldn't help but think it was pretty cool that the city was shaped like the moon. He'd left before the woman began her story, making his way toward the trees he could see looming over the city. The boy was completely oblivious to the fact that the woman was even going to tell a story at all. If he'd known, he might have actually stayed. He loved good stories. However, he had other things on his mind, namely adventure, and, by his estimate, it would take him most of the day to make it to the forest. Well, there was no use in lollygagging. He picked up his feet and started running. He wanted to get there as fast as he could. He could smell an adventure. Zoro arrived in much the same fashion as Luffy, the swimming taking far longer. The swordsman just could not swim at the speed Luffy could. He knew he would never beat Luffy in a swimming contest, and he was okay with it. He never enjoyed swimming that much anyway. Making his way to the street, his katana tucked safely into his haramaki, Zoro decided not to pick any direction, and just let his feet take him where he needed to go. It's not as if picking a direction would have helped anyway. After walking the coast for what seemed a good amount of time, the teen cut inland. As he walked, he noticed that he was passing more actual buildings, rather than just stalls the further he made it. Eventually, everything began to look the same, so he stopped focusing on his surroundings, and began to think. The first thing to cross his mind was that he would need a place to stay, and a way to eat. He'd be on the island for a while, according to Luffy, and in that time he was going to try and unlock the power his future captain had told him about. He had faith in himself that he could do it. The only problem was, he had no idea where to begin. It was like reading something out of a storybook. You read about amazing things, and wish for something like that to become reality, but you never actually expect it to happen. Well, it did. It had happened, and Zoro was lost. Not for the first time in his life, certainly. However, this time it was more metaphorical than literal. He'd not changed physically, however, his perception of the world had changed. If Luffy was this far ahead of him, just how far ahead was he? It was like a film had been lifted from the verdict's eyes, and the thought of it had ignited a fire in his very soul. He needed to get stronger. His dream depended on it. He was brought out of his musings by the sound of a large gathering of people. Without realizing it, Zoro had walked into what looked to him like some sort of town square. A small fountain stood in the center of the area, crowds walking around it from store to store, shopping to their heart's content. All around stood shops selling various things. Food, clothing, weapons, trinkets, you name it, and it was more than likely being sold somewhere. Zoro pushed his way into the crowd and, just above the dull roar of the conversations around him, heard something that almost called to him. A hammer on metal. Something in his stomach curled with excitement, although he couldn't say why. Or was it his hip? When asked about it later, he wouldn't be able to give a good answer. He walked, as if in a trance, through the throngs of people toward the building. He could hear the clangs of metal on metal coming from. When he'd finally reached his destination, without even reading the sign above the door, he made his way inside. The swordsman just knew there was something there for him to learn. If he would have stopped to look, the sign hanging above the door read, Brewer's Blades. It took Luffy a surprisingly short amount of time to reach the western edge of the city. When he really put his mind to it, he could run pretty fast. He had managed to, somehow, find most of the paths and alleyways that weren't very crowded. He didn't really think much of it though. The black-haired boy just attributed it to luck and moved on. As he passed the last buildings of the city, he crossed into a clearing that sat just before the tree line. Walking into the area, he noticed that the trees there at the edge of the forest started small and appeared to grow larger as you got deeper. Luffy couldn't help but be mesmerized by the majesty of the sight before him and stopped to stare. He had never seen such a thing before. The 16-year-old had seen large objects and animals before, so when it came to things of magnitude he was no stranger. However, these magnificent creations of Mother Nature were unlike anything the young boy had ever seen. He approached one of the trees and looked up toward its top. Even the branches were huge. Scratch that, everything was huge, the leaves too. The tree was also extremely tall. It certainly wasn't the tallest thing the teen would see in his life, but it was most definitely the single tallest thing he'd seen in his short life so far. And he'd seen a castle. Placing his hand against the bark, Luffy was surprised to find the light gray texture smooth rather than coarse, as he would have expected. Quite beautiful, don't you think? A voice came from over his shoulder. The teen turned curiously to the owner of the airy voice. He didn't remember anyone else being in the clearing, and he was sure he would have noticed someone else walking out of the city. The distance between the last of the buildings and the forest wasn't very short after all. Who are you? Luffy asked, taking in the stranger before him. He was tall, and the boy's first thought was that the man may have looked younger if his hair wasn't white. The stranger's head was framed by two long wavy strands of white hair that were bridged by short bangs hanging just above his eyebrows. At the back, the rest of his hair was pulled into a ponytail, held by a golden band. The man had a boyish face that had wrinkled slightly with age, kind dark black eyes, and a soft smile that played on his lips. The forest green coat that bore a single gold button on its left sleeve rested on the old man's shoulders. Underneath, he wore a pale yellow shirt, along with a pair of maroon trousers and dark black boots. Lastly, at his waist was tied an orange sash. Tucked into it was a long nadachi, its blade hidden in a sheath made of dark lacquered wood. That's an old man who spends his days here, as a promise to an old friend, the curious man stated, wistfully. Luffy heard the word friend, and all reservations about the strange person disappeared, his expression immediately brightening. Friend. I've got a cool friend too. He exclaimed before a pout took over his face. He did tell me he wanted to be alone the whole time we're here though. Your friend has left you alone? The older man asked, frowning curiously. The straw-hatted teen thought about the question for a moment. Yeah, but it was kind of my fault. I told him some stuff that changed some stuff, and then he said he needed time to think about it. So yeah, definitely my fault, he answered with a laughing smile. Zoro was just so interesting to him. He especially liked the way he used 3 swords. Luffy then remembered that he had been responsible for breaking 2 of said swords, and instead of feeling apologetic, only hoped his green-haired friend would find 2 more, so he could see more of the cool way he fought. He loved watching people fight. When he was young, it was a way Makino had helped him learn. He thought that was a good thing. Otherwise, he could have ended up really dumb. So, what I'm hearing is you let him be alone, the stranger said, having puzzled it out. Luffy remembered the look in his friend's eye before their boat had sunk. He had no doubt he was going to be even stronger when they met again. Coming out of his thoughts, the young boy turned back into the conversation. Yeah, I guess you could say that. I think he'll be stronger once he has time to figure things out, he spoke in return. A much more mature answer than I perhaps thought you may give, the wizened man said, surprise evident in his eyes. Luffy pointed offendedly in the old guy's direction. Hey, that was kinda mean, he replied. The stranger only laughed as he walked past the boy and into the large forest, signaling to follow. Come with me, young one. It's been far too long since I was last able to talk with such an interesting person, he said, his small smile back in place. What brings you to this island, if I might ask? He questioned, as they broke through the tree line and entered the large expanse of nature. Luffy was mesmerized. The trees were huge. The further he looked into the forest, the larger and taller they became. If this was the start, just how big were the ones toward the middle of the forest? He stopped staring, as they continued walking, and answered, "Well, do you want the long version or the short version?" he asked. The red-vested boy remembered explaining to Rirka, and it had taken far too long. He'd even missed the execution because of it. "The short version will do," the man replied. The straw-hatted teen smiled at the answer. "I came here to get strong and have fun," he said simply. And it was the truth. He'd set out to gain experience, and to find strength in that experience. In Luffy's mind, however, it was much more simple. Having adventures meant doing fun stuff, and getting stronger. "You sound like my old friend when you say things like that," the older man spoke, wistfully, as the two continued on their path through the forest. "Really?" Luffy asked excitedly. Was he a cool guy? The stranger's smile enlarged imperceptibly. He was, in fact, a very cool guy. "Can you tell me about him?" the teen asked, hope evident in his voice. He loved learning about cool people. He eyed the boy behind him, as they walked, and his smile grew. "No. I don't think I will." "What the heck? You were totally supposed to say yes." Luffy cried in outrage. "Nope, you're so mean." The teen huffed dejectedly, crossing his arms, a pout on his face. The old man only laughed, and chose to stay silent rather than respond, as they continued to make their way through the forest. Quickly becoming bored with the silence, the large trees absorbed Luffy once again, and he began to run his hands along the ones he would pass. With more time to inspect them, he realized they were more tube-like than any trees he'd seen before. It felt like the tree had been sanded down, and left smooth. Like really smooth. He hadn't heard about many other islands, to begin with, but he knew that this kind of stuff wasn't normal in the blues. The Grand Line, sure. Shanks had told him these stories. Granted, he had grown up in a place where animals could be huge, but the trees were something else. "Hey, old guy. What's the name of this place?" Luffy asked, seemingly out of the blue. "The name of this island is East Lodestone." "The forest has no name, most simply call it Lodestone Forest," the old guy answered, not interrupting his stride. "First off, that is a name," the younger boy pointed out, "and second off, why east?" he asked. Luffy thought it was a good enough question. Why not west? After all, the forest was on the west side. At least he thought this was the west side. He didn't really care much for the answer, honestly, he just really liked talking to the old man. The East Lodestone shares 3 sisters. One in each blue, all bearing one counterpart, the stranger answered cryptically, keeping his eyes on the path before him. Luffy could only stare at the back of the man's head. "I don't know what that means," he stated, blankly. He'd never been good with people who talked in confusing ways. "And nor is it, really, for you to understand until you reach Laugh-Tale. That is," the older man glanced back at the teen, pointing a thumb at his hat from over his shoulder. "If you're wearing that, can I assume that the end of the Grand Line is, most likely, your destination?" he questioned, the wistful tone of voice back once again. "Hey. How the heck did you know that, Gramps?" Luffy asked, eyeing the old guy curiously. He was sure he hadn't mentioned anything about being a pirate. "I happen to know the original owner of that hat," the tall man said, a full-blown smile gracing his face. The straw-hatted teen was off to the side enough to see the old guy's smile, and it was the first time he'd seen the older man show any real emotion since they'd met. He decided that it was a good look for him. It made the wrinkles in his face almost disappear, somehow, and made him appear younger. So caught up in the moment, he totally missed what had been said that actually made the old man smile. He just smiled his smile in return. The stranger's eyes widened, and he continued smiling. "Young man. There is a cave in the heart of this place that is guarded by what some call the Forest Lord and others, the Lord of the Forest," he began. "It matters not to me what name you choose to use. I only wish to tell you that if you find their cave and best them, they will grant you the treasure they guard." If Luffy wasn't already invested, the word treasure would have sealed the deal. He was definitely going to beat the forest guy and steal his treasure. Well, not steal. He wasn't a pirate yet. He was going to win it. Before anything though, he needed to find the place. He wasn't sure how big the forest was, but from the size and look of the trees, he felt that just doing that would take forever. Everything looked the same. It was all just gray bark and dark green leaves. The chances that he was about to get lost were very high. That meant he needed to get started, and soon. "I'll do it, old man. I'll beat the forest guy and get his treasure," declared Luffy, starting to pass the man who'd led him thus far. Something in the way the boy said it made the white-haired man believe him. Could also quite possibly die, said the man thought, slightly frowning to himself. The boy didn't look very strong. As Luffy sprinted towards parts of the forest the stranger hadn't visited in a very long time, he spared a look at the back of Luffy's red vest. The red color and the straw hat reminded him of a similar red-colored coat he used to see around the shoulders of the man who wore that very same straw hat. "Before you leave," the old man exclaimed after the familiar color. The boy stopped and turned, impatience written all over his face. "What is it, Gramps? I gotta go find a forest guy or whatever." he shouted, clearly wanting him to get to the point. Would it be so rude of me if I asked for your name? He asked. Luffy recoiled, shocked, as if it was just hitting him for the first time that they hadn't yet introduced themselves. It most certainly was. Sorry about that, he said, laughing, his signature smile in place. My name's Monkey D. Luffy. And I'm gonna be the king of the pirates. The stranger smiled one more big smile before replying, well, Monkey D. Luffy, future king of the pirates, my name is Spencer. And I am very glad to have met you. He waved Luffy toward deeper parts of the forest. Go, and seek your treasure, young friend. This is farewell, but we will see each other again someday, right? The teen asked. I think not, Spencer replied, the same small smile he had worn since the two met gracing his lips once again. Luffy made to argue, but the older man shot him a scary look. Go, he said once more, your treasure awaits. Whatever, Gramps. It was nice meeting you anyways. The teenager exclaimed with a smile, making his way ahead and into the forest. He might not see the old man again, but he was glad he got to meet him. He'd given him an adventure to go on. As Spencer lost track of Luffy's form to Trunks of Grey, he knew, regardless, he was staying out of it. The old man had promised himself to let the year Roger created take the mantle, and he wasn't going to interfere. If the child died here in this forest, the child died. Who was he kidding? It wasn't him he needed to worry about. He would need to worry for the world. The young man was sure to turn it upside down. Your will is in good hands, Roger. Entering the building, Zoro immediately heard the dull pings of a metal hammer coming from somewhere in the back. However, the chime of the bell above the door rang clearly throughout the shop, and the rhythmic sound ceased. Shuffling replaced the loud noises, and a muscular graying man made his way out of the back, soot covering his arms and face. What can I do you for, son? The man asked, gesturing to the various arms around the store. As you can see, we sell blades, and one or two other things. The man walked to a counter where a register sat, and gestured for Zoro to approach. The green-haired teenager acquiesced, and began to walk toward the counter the store owner now stood behind. His eyes scanned his surroundings, as he made his way through the shop. There were different sections for different types of blades, and Zoro could see every kind of sword he could think of. Many cases were holding different, seemingly rare, blades of all sorts of make. The most cared for cases, however, seemed to be the katanas. He'd have to ask the shopkeeper about them later. Taking space, directly in the middle of the shop, were mannequins. As far as the swordsman could tell, they were only there to show off the few sets of armor being sold. Zoro walked around them as he approached, and was, finally, able to get a good look at the man he was talking to. Well, his top half. However, it was more than enough to look at. The older man in front of me was a mountain of muscle. The blacksmith stood, at the least, a foot taller than the younger boy, and bore arms as large as his head. He had long graying hair, peppered with spots of white and black, tied back into a high ponytail, and a beard of the same coloring. His face was long and wrinkled with age, but his eyes hadn't lost their spark. Their amber color flashed gold in the sunlight peeking through the windows, and contrasted beautifully with the dark ebony of his skin. He wore a striped green tank top that showed off his massive muscles, and that was all the swordsman could see. Reaching the counter, Zoro received an expectant look from the man behind it. I'm not here to buy anything, at least, not right now, he answered the man's earlier question, looking him right in the eye. He did still need 2 more swords, but that could wait. Something had led him to this shop, so he was sure it was where he was supposed to be. Window shopper then, the older man huffed, turned to walk back to the room he came from. I don't much like people like you. Always taking me away from my Ferdot. I'm not here, as a shopper, at all, Zoro interrupted, beginning to follow the man. That sound earlier, what was it from? The subject change threw the older man off, but he recovered quickly. You mean the foreign I was doing? He asked, curiously. He chose to forget the rude interruption. It wasn't often someone came in to ask about blacksmithing. Forging? Zoro asked, eyes narrowing in excitement. The feeling from before was back. I'm a blacksmith, so, yeah. I was in the back forging some custom pieces when you came in, the blacksmith said, nonchalantly. He stopped when he saw Zoro following him. He wasn't letting some brat anywhere near his forge. It was his baby. He didn't care if they wanted to know about blacksmithing or not. Teach me, Zoro said, to the hulking man in front of him. The man stared at Zoro in the eyes for a few seconds, as if looking for something, before turning, and continuing his way back to his baby. No, I refuse. The teen was interrupted by the door shutting in his face. The swordsman closed his eyes, and huffed in annoyance. That was kind of expected. He knew he was supposed to be there, he just had to get the man to teach him. It had hit him when the blacksmith mentioned forging. If he knew how it was made, wouldn't that mean he could better use it? Zoro turned away from the door, and started walking back toward the exit. He was going to be back. Every day. Every day, until the man agreed to teach him. He decided he would spend all his time on it if he had to. He didn't know how learning to forge a sword would help him in unlocking the power he was looking for, but he didn't think much of it. Luffy would definitely be mad that he wasn't actually spending his time alone, but he knew this would make him stronger. Therefore, he would pursue it. Hey. That's mine. Luffy yelled in annoyance, holding his large piece of meat high above his head, where the little meat thieves couldn't get it. White. Come get these little brats off me. They're trying to steal my meat again. They aren't even hungry, they just do it to be meanies. The boy screamed, being practically bowled over by a multitude of white forms. Said White patted her way over, and brushed the smaller wolves away from Luffy, something like scolding in her eyes. All the white forms gazed at his piece of meat, before running to various places around the trees, their eyes, unlike their mothers, dancing with laughter. Crisis averted. For now. The pups had grown considerably since the day Luffy had met the pack. He'd only been in the forest for a short while, and it was by complete chance he came upon them, as he'd already gotten lost. Well, maybe not by complete chance. As the boy gazed into the forest, and ate his large piece of raw meat, memories of his meeting with White and her pups floated through his mind. It hadn't been long since Spencer and Luffy had parted ways, and the teenager was already lost. He didn't know which way was north, so he didn't know any of the other directions either. He'd gotten distracted climbing through the trees. Well, he'd been chasing some monkeys, and they had led him on a wild goose chase or monkey chase. So much so, that they eventually escaped the boy's sight, and disappeared into the canopies above, leaving him lost and lonesome. That was stupid. Now I don't know where I am. The straw-hatted teen yelled into an empty forest, sighing, plus, I'm getting kinda hungry. His stomach rumbled loudly. He was definitely going to need food. Protect. Luffy gasped, grabbing his head in unexpected pain. That word. It wasn't even really a word, more like an instinct, yeah. It sounded right to the boy. Said boy heard a faint snarl in the distance, and didn't even stop to think before immediately sprinting his way toward it. It didn't take him very much time to reach the location of the noise. As he looked into the small clearing where the sounds were coming from, Luffy immediately noticed a large white wolf that appeared to be standing over a litter of pups. It was baring its fangs at a gray-colored bear, 3 times his size. The bear had various bleeding bite marks and scratches littering its body. Luffy wasted no time. He sprinted his way into the area at seeing the large bear getting ready to lunge at the wolf. With little time to act, he pushed his right foot off the ground in the middle of his sprint and jumped toward the gray beast. In what would seem like an instant to most, Luffy's, now enhanced, knee smashed into the side of the monstrous bear's head. The impact caused the animal's skull to recoil, and a crack was heard throughout the clearing. The force with which Luffy had propelled himself continued to drive the appendage further into the side of the bear's skull. Soon enough, the beast's head began to give way, and its skull was crushed, as Luffy rode it to the ground. The boy gingerly stood from his place on top of the dead animal. Score. Dinner. The bear was huge, and he was really hungry. Although, it was getting dark. It was hard to eat in the dark, and he couldn't get any wood for a fire. He tried to cut down one of the trees with his, but it had just bounced off. Why had no one told him you couldn't cut the trees down? Now that the wolf pack was safe, Luffy began to ponder. He'd gone fast. Like really fast. The boy smiled to himself. He'd already gotten stronger since leaving home. All that sparring with Zoro had actually helped. He had just been doing it because it was fun. The teen looked to where the growling was coming from earlier, and noticed that the large white wolf, still standing guard over her children, had various spots of red staining her snow-colored fur. Hey, you alright? Luffy asked the she-wolf. He assumed it was a she. Who else could be the mother of the pups under her? The wolf pointed her nose in the direction of the dead bear, and the teen immediately understood. You're a fiery one, aren't you? He asked, laughing. The wolf had obviously gotten her licks in. She only gave a blank stare, and it just made the boy laugh more. With the large animal now looking right at him, Luffy noticed that her eyes were completely black, as were her pups. He thought that was kind of weird. Cool, but weird. The wolf then pointed her nose to the bear again and, much to the black-haired boy's chagrin, he understood that too. She wanted him to share. Fine. I'll share, I guess. I should probably do some sharing before I become a pirate because, after that, I'm not sharing with anybody. Luffy said to the large white wolf in front of him. The she-wolf began to pat her way toward him, her little pups following closely behind. As she approached, the wolf brought her muzzle to Luffy's face, and gave it a lick. Yeah, I guess we can be friends, he smiled, pulling away from the large animal. But if you're gonna be my friend, you need a name. The boy eyed the white wolf, and all of her identical pups, a simple name popping into his head, You're White. The large wolf practically tackled the young boy, and began to lick his face once again, much more aggressively this time. Her young pups weren't far behind, beginning to climb all over his prone form. I get it. That tickles. Luffy laughed, succumbing to the attacks of his new friends. Once the group of wolves had halted their assault, they began to make their way toward the bear on the ground. It was feeding time. Hey White, the black-haired boy asked, getting up from the forest floor. The wolf turned, looking at Luffy expectantly. Can I hang out with you guys for a little while? My friend, the boy was interrupted by the wolf approaching, and putting her face next to Luffy's, nuzzling him in confirmation. Thanks White, he laughed, and hugged her neck. The two then walked together toward where their next meal was, as friends. Who knows, maybe she could even help him find the cave. Luffy was brought out of his musings by his teeth hitting bone. He tossed his bare meat stick into the forest, and got up from his place against one of the forest's many large trees. "Wait, how much further till we reach the cave?" the boy asked, looking at his companion. She was currently resting against another tree, curled around her pups. Night had fallen, and they were getting ready to rest. It had been a long day of traveling and hunting. The she-wolf raised her head from her position on the ground and looked at Luffy, as if answering his question. "We're almost there," he asked, excitedly jumping in the air. The wolf continued to look at Luffy, confirming her answer, then wrinkled her nose, and pointed her muzzle in, what would seem to most, another random direction in the forest. "I do not stink that bad," Luffy argued in protest, sniffing himself. Never mind. He needed a bath, and he needed one now. He grimaced. It was a miracle he hadn't smelled himself sooner. His nose actually kind of hurt. Wait, could he smell better? Now that he thought about it, as he looked around the forest, he thought he could see a little better too. Not further, well, not enough to notice, but just sharper, he guessed. He wondered if his other senses had been trained a little bit too. That would be so cool. The she-wolf only turned away, disagreement evident in her eyes, and laid her head back amongst her children. "Fine. I'll go find the pond and take a stupid bath." The boy huffed, ending the one-sided conversation. Well, most would think it was one-sided. Luffy would just tell them they weren't listening. He turned and began to walk toward where the animal had pointed. The wolves had been leading him around the forest for what the boy thought was almost a month. He stayed with them after their fateful meeting, and, in that time, he had done everything with them, ate, slept, hunted, etc. If the wolves did it, more than likely, Luffy was doing it too. In the teen's mind, he was just hanging out with his friends. Of course, there was also an added benefit. White did in fact happen to know where the cave he was looking for was. He had asked her about it the same day they'd started traveling together. The one thing wolves didn't do that Luffy desperately needed to, according to White, was bathe. He was starting to stink. Like bad. The wolf pups, who were not so small anymore, were starting to keep their distance from him, when they weren't trying to steal his food, of course. The straw-hatted boy continued to make his way through the forest until he came upon a small body of water, a little waterfall standing at its opposite edge. Green grass, blue water, a waterfall, what more could he ask for? It was the perfect place for a bath. Without even thinking about it, Luffy sprinted his way to the edge of the water, and cannonballed his way in, clothes, hat, and all. A large splash echoed through the area, as soon as the boy's body hit liquid. The warm temperature brought a content smile to his face, as he rose from the depths, and broke the surface. "This feels amazing," Luffy sighed, taking a look at the small waterfall in front of him. He swam forward, and found the water rather shallow below the moving liquid. The boy looked around the area, before stripping out of his clothing, and began to wash the items under the light pressure of the water streaming into the small pond. Makino had taught him how to wash stuff, so he liked to think he was pretty good at it. He didn't have any soap, but the pressure from the waterfall would, probably, be enough to rid the items of their stench. A yawn broke through Luffy's lips. He was getting a little sleepy. He glanced at the warm water below him, and couldn't help but think that it felt like a great place for a nap. The water would be like a nice warm blanket. Yeah. He was definitely taking a nap. With his mind made up, Luffy sat stark naked, excluding his hat and necklace, under the waterfall washing his clothes in quiet contentment. The boy wasn't shy about any sort of nakedness. Let's be honest, there wasn't a shy bone in his entire body. So, when he heard a startled scream from the land behind him, he immediately turned around, searching for the source. The screaming only grew louder, as his naked front faced the shore. Zoro took a runner's stance with his legs, and bent at the hip, eyes at his feet. He laid a hand on Wado Ichimonji, and grasped it tightly, but not too tightly. With his eyes peering forward, a straw dummy standing in front of him, the swordsman's image flashed. In a split second, he was behind the dummy, slowly sliding his single-sided blade into his white sheath. A small click was the only sound made, as the tsuba connected with the dot. He stood from his bent position, and turned, satisfied by what he saw. There was no cut anywhere on the dummy, even though he had used the sharp side of his katana. "You didn't even cut it," came Sol's voice, an unimpressed look in his eye. The older man would often come out to watch Zoro train, and it just happened to be one of those times. Zoro smirked at the blacksmith. "That's the point, old man," he replied, resting his hand on Waldo's hilt. "This katana will only cut what I want it to, nothing more, and nothing less." "Whatever, brat," Sol said, eyes still hanging on to his unimpressed look. "And where do you get off calling me, old man? I gave you a place to eat, sleep, and work. So show some respect to your elders." The man yelled, crossing his arms, and heading back to his forge. He had enough of watching the brat not cut anything. As the door closed behind Sol, Zoro continued to stand in the small yard behind the shop. He'd been going there to practice every day since the old blacksmith had let him start working. It had taken a lot of convincing, but the younger boy eventually managed to get the dark-skinned man to hire him, as a pack mule. In the beginning, Sol had absolutely refused every time the boy had come to the shop, which happened to be every day. But Zoro had been adamant, and after a week of non-stop pestering, Sol finally cracked. Now, he works every day doing various things around the shop. He did do other things, but Zoro's main job was moving the large mounds of metal Sol often purchased out back, and breaking them apart. The team didn't mind the work. The heavy metals made for a good workout, and he was always looking to get stronger. Be it getting stronger physically or in other ways, it was all the same to the swordsman. Strength was strength. Immediately after he was hired, Zoro asked Sol if he meant to teach him forging. To his immense surprise, the blacksmith had, once again, refused him. The why of it still baffled the boy, as he thought about what the older man had said to him back then. Come again? Zoro asked the blacksmith, mouth gaping like a fish. He thought for sure the man would teach him if only he could get hired. It was why he stopped asking to be taught, and instead just asked to work. I said I'm not teaching you, Sol replied, finality oozing from his voice. Well then, what the hell's the point of working here? Zoro yelled at the man, teeth sharper than a shark's. The man laughed at the anger he could see in the verdict's eyes. I never said I wouldn't let you watch. How the hell is that any different? The swordsman screamed incredulously, frustration clear on his face. First, the man had made him wait a week, and now he was being all confused. Zoro hated confusion. Quit screaming, brat. The man yelled back, growing tired of Zoro's loud voice. The boy had the decency to at least look scolded. I'm not teaching you, because of those eyes, the man started, looking at Zoro. Those ain't the eyes of a blacksmith. I would know, he pointed at the swordsman's eyes. Those are the eyes of a demon. Zoro just looked at the man like he was crazy, and decided to continue letting him explain himself. Maybe it would start to make sense if he let him talk more. I've known a few demons in my time. And ain't one of them was a blacksmith, Sol stated like it answered all of Zoro's questions. Although, Garp was more monster than demon. His son though, the blacksmith whispered to himself. Garp? The thought. He hadn't heard of that name before. So, you won't teach me because you think I have the eyes of a demon. Zoro's sweat dropped, looking at the older man. He decided to ask about this Garp later. He definitely wouldn't forget. You don't get it, kid. I'm helping you here. You aren't meant to forge steel. Those eyes, they tell me you were meant to use it, Sol said, sagely. I've seen eyes like those before, and I just got a feeling. Zoro paused. He kind of liked the sound of that. Plus, at the end of the day, he never really wanted to forge weapons, anyway, he just wanted to know how it was done. Being taught would have been the best way, but being able to watch would have to do. Fine, old man. Whatever. As long as I learn what I came here to learn, he acquiesced. And Zoro had learned. He learned the process of forging, specifically, forging blades. Without actual teaching, he could try his hand at it, but he wasn't too keen on actually being able to make a suitable katana for himself. However, he knew the process, and everything that went into it, and, as he predicted, it enabled him to better use his sword. However, it was in a slightly unexpected way. Sol loved forging weapons, but he was always reluctant to let Zoro very close to the forge. The first time he did, watching the man work, it was obvious that the man forged not only his hammer, but also his heart. The metal took the exact shape that he wanted, almost, as if he could will every hammer blow to do exactly what he needed to make his creation. He had the confidence and skill to know that every strike would meet its target. Zoro watched Sol forge many weapons over his time with the blacksmith, but he never let him see the finished blades. It was almost as if he was keeping a secret from him. A secret the man didn't think he was ready to learn yet. The swordsman eventually came to understand the fruits of his labor, after Sol had finally deemed him worthy enough to watch the creation of a blade, and, subsequently, examine it. A katana. The weapon the man made had a personality, per se. That was the best way Zoro could describe it. It wasn't quite a personality. It was more like a fleeting breeze, faintly whispering in the air. He barely felt it, but it still raised the hairs on his skin. He had a feeling that the reason he felt something from the blade at the time was that he now knew and understood the katana through watching how it was made, the knowledge he had gained from watching Sol during his time in the shop. It had also been when the blacksmith told Zoro that his sword had a name. At the time, when Wado Ichimonji first left his mouth, it almost felt like the katana had begun to hum, the same whispering feeling from Sol's blade breezing across his skin. He had spent weeks trying to figure out what it all meant, and it clicked one night, as he was sharpening his newly dubbed Wado Ichimonji, a whispering of air lightly singing across his skin. The weapons he would use were to be his, and his alone. They would help him reach his goals, and if they didn't want to, he would prove to them why they should. He already felt it with Wado Ichimonji. They would act as one. The blade would do exactly as he willed. It would cut whatever it was he needed to cut, and the opposite was also true. It was devoted to Zoro, and Zoro in turn was devoted to his sword. As weird as that may sound, there was still more to learn on the island, though. They just knew it. He didn't know if Sol would be the one to lead him there, or if he would find the knowledge on his own, but Zoro was excited regardless. He was already stronger than he was before. How much stronger could he get before he left? And how strong was his friend already? He was excited just thinking about it. Pervert. The girl yelled from the shore of the small pond, shielding her eyes, and running behind a nearby tree. What the hell are you doing naked in the forest? You idiot. She sounded like she was blushing. You're the one peeping on me. Luffy yelled back, indignantly. The girl had just walked up and screamed. Who the hell did that? He was only trying to take a bath. He just didn't want his nose to hurt anymore. I was not peeping. I just happened to stumble on this place while. She paused before she could finish her thought. You know what, it doesn't matter. Just put some damn clothes on. They're wet, so I can't, Luffy exclaimed, crossing his arms and closing his eyes. He was gonna stand his ground. Besides, what did it matter? It was just skin. Nothing weird about skin. There was a pause in the air. So, just put them on anyways, the girl responded, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, her voice drastically dropping in volume. Luffy held his position unflinchingly. I refuse, he stated in reply. He was going to get clean. Plus, the water felt great. He wanted to relax for a while longer before heading back to the wolves, and that nap sounded really good right now. What the hell? Why? The unknown girl questioned, volume increasing once again. Cause. I don't want to, Luffy yelled in return. And he really didn't. The girl could join if she wanted to, though. He wouldn't mind that. He used to share a bath with his brothers all the time. You know what, that wasn't a bad idea. Hey. Why don't we just share it? Offered the straw-hatted boy. What? The girl screeched. He laughed at the funny noise the girl had made. You obviously came here for a bath. And to peep. Why don't we just share it? You can peep all you want. The black-haired boy jokes, his smile gracing his face. Makino had taught him about all that stuff. It had been pretty embarrassing at the time. Right now, though, it didn't really interest him. That was later stuff. Though, he didn't get why she screeched like that. He thought everyone knew about it. We are not sharing, she abruptly stopped, unless her head flashed around the tree, berry symbols in her eyes. You pay me 50,000 berries a second to be in the same bath as me. Luffy's eyes snapped open. Wasn't that like a lot? He noticed that the girl had shoulder-length orange hair, and her eyes had berry symbols in them. He thought she was pretty, even with the weird eyes. Cruel. But weird. Before he could examine her further, however, her words registered. I don't have any money, the boy replied, sweat dropping. The orange-haired girl's eyes immediately went back to normal, as she ducked back behind the tree, and Luffy thought he saw a flash of brown. Well then, no deal, bucko. Either put some clothes on or leave. She yelled. There was another pause before the boy spoke again. I refuse, Luffy repeated. There was no way he was going to let a peeper drive him away from his relaxing time. Plus, he was here first. You're impossible. The girl huffed in annoyance. The screaming match paused again, and there was quiet in the area for a moment. It was longer this time. The girl was more than likely thinking over his offer. Funny, but only if you promise not to look, she said eventually, breaking the silence. Luffy laughed at the irony in her words. It's me, who should be worried about someone peeping. I was not peeping. She continued to yell back incessantly. Don't believe you, replied the black-haired boy, sticking out his tongue. He turned and grabbed his clothes from their place under the small waterfall, laying them out to dry along with his hat. Once he was finished, he closed his eyes, turning back toward the girl's direction, and submerging his body up to his waist. You can come out now. My eyes are closed, I promise. There was another pause. The girl was probably gathering her courage. If you look, you're gonna owe me some serious money, she said, peeking around the edge of the tree. Luffy only laughed at her words. Whatever. Just come on in. The water feels great. The black-haired boy heard some shuffling, and the rustling of clothes, then, a splash. You were right, this does feel nice, the girl sighed, head breaking the pond's surface. I know, right? Luffy exclaimed, beginning to float on his back, eyes still closed, as promised. Being who he was, he didn't realize he was definitely showing his bits. Well, he did, he just didn't really care. Can you not do that? The girl asked, something like embarrassment in her voice. Luffy sighed in relaxation. If you don't want to see, don't look, he began to giggle, but I know you wanna, you peeper. I was not peeping. The girl argued. Was to, was not, was to, she huffed, and Luffy heard her swim further away from him. What's your name, anyways? He asked, in the direction of the retreating noise. Why do you need to know my name? We'll probably never see each other again. She found a spot further away from Luffy, and glanced at the boy's closed eyes, beginning to make her way down before she caught herself, and turned away, a slight blush rising to her cheeks. Well, I'll never see you again. What the heck? You don't want to be friends? Luffy asked, as he began lazily paddling his way around the pond, instinctively avoiding the girl. Getting too close might just get him killed. Why would you even ask that? She questioned. He continued to float on his back, his muscles starting to feel, as if they were melting. Why not? You already know me pretty well, he giggled. The boy's eyes were beginning to grow heavy, even in their closed state, and his paddling was starting to slow. He felt really good. The water's temperature was just right. The girl's voice mixing with the waterfall was kinda nice to listen to. It was all just so relaxing. Also, he yawned. I like making new friends. And I like to think that's a pretty good reason. Well, I think that's stupid, the unnamed girl said, a frown in her voice. Well, why do you think it's stupid? Luffy asked, curiously. He was too tired to get mad that she had, in a way, called him stupid. Because I can't trust you. Being friends is all about trust, she began. You say you like making friends, but that doesn't make me trust you. Luffy's mind was getting foggier by the second. So until you can trust me we can't be friends? He asked. The girl could do whatever she wanted. She wasn't gonna hurt him. He just had a feeling. He didn't have anything to say about all this trust business right now. He figured out when he woke up. That's exactly right, the girl stated, and then paused for a moment, but that doesn't mean we can't team up. Luffy perked up slightly at this, the brain fog receding a little. Team up? He asked, curiously, sleep still obviously in his voice. Yeah, you know. You help me I help you, the girl stated, simply. Isn't that what friends do? Luffy asked, still floating carelessly in the water. The girl was confusing him, and it was just making him more tired. Yes, but friends expect nothing in return for helping each other. I, on the other hand, want at least 90% of whatever it is you help me find, she answered, sounding very haughty about it. 90%? Luffy questioned. Wasn't that almost all of it? Plus, he didn't even know what it was she was looking for. Yeah, 90 to me, and 10 to you. Seems pretty fair to me, she said, in an almost genuine tone. To be fair, Luffy would have usually said yes to something like this, however, he was on an adventure already. Plus, the old man had wanted him to get the treasure, so he didn't want to share it. I'm good, he answered eventually. He wanted to find the forest guy, and get their treasure before he started a new adventure, and it seemed like the girl wanted to take him on one, friends or not. They took a moment before replying, your loss. I heard the place I'm looking for is guarded by a protector. That means it must be guarding something worth tons of money. Protector? Luffy asked, something nagging at the back of his mind. Why was the word protector making him feel like he was forgetting something important? Yeah. Apparently, a ton of people have tried to take his treasure. But, none have been able to succeed. I've even heard that some people have died trying to get it, the girl explained. Luffy shot straight up. His upper chest was the only thing above the surface of the water, as he pointed an accusatory finger at the orange-haired girl, still managing to keep his eyes closed. He was good at keeping promises after all. No way. That's my treasure. And I am not sharing, he declared. It had finally hit him, as he let her talk. No way was he going to share. She was looking for the same treasure he was. Wait, you already know about the cave? The girl asked, curiously. Duh. An old man told me to go get the forest guy's treasure, and I'm gonna get it. No one else. He stated, proudly. That old guy was super cool, and Luffy wasn't letting anyone else get the treasure. He felt he owed it to him, he was the one who sent him on this awesome adventure after all. Well, just because you want it doesn't mean I can't get it before you do, there isn't. The urge Luffy had to open his eyes, and give the girl he was talking to a glare was so strong he had to put his hands over them, just to make sure they didn't open. No way. I can't remember that old guy's name, but he wanted me to get the treasure. So I'm gonna get it. And I'm keeping it. He yelled. The girl didn't reply immediately. Instead, she paused, as if thinking. Okay, fine. You seem to want it pretty badly so, you can have it, she replied eventually. The boy grit his teeth. Really? He questioned in surprise, but I thought you wanted to sell the treasure for money or whatever. Well yeah. I still do, but it wouldn't be fair if I just barged in on your find, the girl said. Luffy smiled, and brought his hands back down to his side, sighing, now, that's a relief. He laid back in the water, and began floating again. Now that he didn't have to worry about the girl stealing his treasure, it was finally time for a nap. Yeah, I'm definitely not gonna still go after the treasure, she announced, rolling her eyes. Luffy smiled at her words. Well, thanks. You had me worried for a second. He replied, ignorantly, finally letting sleep take him over. In his floating position, the water acted as the perfect bed. Plus, he could just talk to the girl when he woke up right. Well, thanks. You had me worried there for a second. The black-haired boy said, a sleep bubble beginning to form in his nose. Nami scanned the boy's face. Yep. Definitely asleep. What an idiot. They quickly scrambled out of the water, and dressed. She had to find the cave quickly. She obviously wasn't going to let the idiot boy get the treasure she'd been looking for. For days no less. She was about to give up, and head back to the city when she finally found the clearing the cave was in. She had only wanted to get some rest, and wash up before she tried to steal the forest lord's treasure. Nami didn't know who or what it was, but she thought being clean couldn't hurt, and the rest was much needed. How was she supposed to know a person would be there? Now she couldn't even rest. She had to get the treasure before that weird guy. She blushed, other images of the young man coming to her mind. Quickly gathering herself, and wiping all thoughts of the boy she had met from her mind, the orange-haired girl turned in the direction she knew the cave was. She had to get the treasure. For Kokoyashi. Nami took off at a sprint in the direction she was facing, determination written all over her face. She had already snuck past and stolen from many pirates already, so why not add a lore to the list? How hard could it be? A faint scream startled Luffy from his dreams of meat. So faint that in his grogginess, he wasn't even sure he'd heard it. He tried to listen for the noise again, but it didn't come. He looked around the clearing and couldn't help but feel that something was missing. Thinking back to before he fell asleep, it hit him, the orange-haired girl wasn't there anymore. His eyes widened. Things were slowly starting to connect in the boy's brain, now that he was more awake. Luffy swam to where he had laid out his clothes, and quickly put them on. The scream he'd heard must have been the orange-haired girl. He wasn't sure, but he had a feeling, and he always trusted his instincts. He needed to go find where the cave was. He was sure that's where the girl had gone, even though she said she wouldn't. That peeping liar. Finishing dressing, the slightly incensed boy quickly made his way back into the forest to go find White and the pups. He would have immediately started looking for them, but the scream had only awoken him. At the time, he wasn't aware enough to know where it had come from. So, because White knew where the cave was, he was going to get her to take him there. Simple as that. Luffy pushed his legs as fast as possible, and the trees began to blur by his eyes, as he unthinkingly dodged his way through the numerous trunks. The only thing on his mind was his destination. White and her pack were soon in Luffy's line of sight, and he pushed himself even faster until he came skidding into the clearing. White. He breathed out, hands on his knees. I need you to take me to the cave, now. Almost, as if the wolf could sense the boy's urgency, she darted her way into the forest. The straw-hatted teen followed her retreating form, immediately breaking into a sprint again, White's pups doing the same. The black-haired boy and the younger wolves caught up to the she-wolf quickly, and the group ran together, as what they were, a pack. Zoro glanced around the little spring, and sighed in contentment. He'd been lucky enough to find it before night had fallen. He would have had to sleep out in the open air otherwise. Now, he had a nice hot spring to lay back, and get some shut-eye in. The young man sat in a small pool of water that stopped just below his pec muscles. Steam rose from the liquid like a smoking volcano, a testament to his heat. Trees stood in a circle around the area, making it mostly enclosed, and relatively private. Zoro liked that. The actual pool itself would only fit 3 or 4 people at most, and he thought it was weird that the pool looked more like a crater than a hot spring after looking under the water. Sol had told him to go into the forest and cut down one of the trees, saying he needed some of the wood for a job. So, like any good worker, he had. Apparently, the man had forgotten to tell Zoro it was impossible. He tried everything. Every move he had. Well, every move he had used one sword. None of it even left a scratch. He still didn't quite understand it. He'd gone further into the forest to see if all the trees were impossible to cut, and well, he got lost. Now that he thought back on it more, it made a lot of sense why Sol couldn't stop laughing when he gave him the job. Zoro had given up when night began to fall, resigning himself to trying again tomorrow, and left the area to find a nice place to get some shut-eye. Little did he know, his feet would bring him to the little slice of paradise he was currently in. The green-haired teenager scowled to himself. Even with the lucky find of the spring, he was still pissed at Sol for giving him the stupid job in the first place. He laid his head back on the edge of the pool, and closed his eyes. He could think about how he was going to get back at the man later. Right now, he needed sleep, and sleep he was going to get. Quiet spread throughout the area, and Zoro slowly began to fall into the realm of Morpheus. Just as he would have lost himself to the clutches of the Sandman, however, a scream pierced through the air. Adrenaline shot through the swordsman, and his tiredness was washed away in a wave of fight-or-flight instincts. Well, in his case, fight instincts. They looked in the direction of the scream before jumping out of the hot water and dressing. He grabbed Wado Ichimonji and tucked it into his haramaki, bolting into the forest toward the call of distress. The sound was close enough for him to know which direction it was in, so it couldn't be far. He weaved between the trees, going as fast as he could, and soon enough Zoro had arrived at his destination. However, he wasn't prepared for what awaited him there. A massive clearing, looking almost like a battlefield with the amount of debris around, stood in front of a huge dome-like cave. It was, more specifically, a half-sphere. Like the moon cut in half. In actuality, that couldn't have been a more apt description. Its material seemed to glow in the moonlight, making it seem like there was a real moon buried in the ground, down to the craters, and everything. Zoro had never seen anything like it. To add to the surrealness further, in the mouth of the cave stood a black wolf. A massive black wolf. Massive was almost an understatement. The boy paled. Zoro didn't know for sure, with the distance, but he thought he might be about as big as one of its fangs. For the second time in recent memory, the swordsman was at a loss. Stuff like what he was seeing just wasn't supposed to be real. First, he had to deal with the craziness Luffy had unleashed upon him, and now they were building-sized wolves. What was next? Islands in the sky. The teen cleared his mind, and made a mad dash toward the cave entrance. He really didn't have time to ponder such things at the moment. Even in his wariness, there was a part of Zoro that was excited. Who got to say they'd fought a beast of such magnitude? There couldn't be many. He grinned a beastly grin to himself, as he cleared the distance to his target. Coming closer to the mouth of the cave, Zoro could finally see where the scream that had brought him there had come from. An orange-haired girl in dark brown khaki shorts and a matching button up top sat just beneath the massive black beast, cowering in utter fear. "Stay away," the girl screamed as she tried to scramble backward towards some semblance of safety. The beast was even more fearsome up close. Midnight black fur spread across its whole body, and its eyes were milky white with no pupils, but Zoro had a feeling that it could see just fine. Also, his first assumption was correct, if not an understatement. Its fangs were definitely the size of him. Some even twice that. How the hell am I even supposed to kill this thing? Zoro gulped, drawing his sword. It was one thing to be excited from afar, but seeing the monster up close was a different story. He didn't really have a choice now though, he wasn't just gonna let the girl die. Zoro burst forward just as the massive maw of the wolf went to swallow the girl. The swordsman dove from the wolf's side, and managed to grab a hold of her, tossing her out of harm's way. However, the same could not be said for him. In saving the girl, he put himself in a very precarious position. The boy thought a mile a minute, as the jaws of the beast began to close around its unintended target. When his teeth had come close enough to closing, Zoro stabbed Wado Ichimonji into the roof of the wolf's mouth with all the strength he had. The blade didn't pierce very far, but it seemed to be enough, the massive wolf recoiling, and lifting its head to howl in pain. Zoro took the chance he'd made, and rolled out of the jaws of death literally. He immediately rose back to his feet, sprinting toward the orange-haired girl he had saved. "Get off your ass, and run," he yelled at the shell-shocked dot. The swordsman almost completely tackled her, but she had at least started to get up. He grabbed the girl's arm, and led her toward the tree line, not even looking back to see if the wolf was chasing them. He was coming back after all. He still wanted to fight the thing. The two ran, as if their lives depended on it, and, soon, they reached the forest. "Keep running, and get the hell out of here. Or I don't really care, but don't expect me to save you a second time," said Zoro, turning back in the wolf's direction. "That's just plain rude. You didn't even ask if I was okay." The orange-haired girl replied indignantly. Zoro turned back, and gave her a glance. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling the girl was the type that would give him a headache if he hung around her too long. "I'm gonna go fight that thing," the swordsman stated, ignoring everything the girl said. He turned back toward the wolf who, surprisingly, hadn't moved from the mouth of the cave. Weird, it almost looked like it was guarding something. Well, he could find out when he beat it. He made to move back out into the clearing, but was interrupted. "You idiot. You're gonna die if you go back out there." The girl screamed at the green-haired boy. She huffed, and looked to the sky, as if to ask why me. "What is up with all the idiots recently? Thanks for worrying, but you shouldn't. I wouldn't die." He didn't even register the idiot comment, and glanced back at the massive black wolf. "I probably won't die." He smirked, ignoring the rest of the girls screaming, and began to walk in the direction of his adversary. Now that he didn't have to worry about the girl. "I'm taking the treasure if you beat that thing." Treasure? Zoro didn't know about any treasure. When he thought about it though, it did make sense. The wolf seemed to be guarding something. It hadn't come after them when they'd run after all. "Whatever," he yelled over his shoulder. He didn't really care about the treasure. He just wanted to fight the beast, and that was exactly what he was going to do. The swordsman unraveled his bandana, and tied it tightly around his head. Time to see what he'd learned. His walk slowly transitioned into a run, then into a sprint, holding Wado Ichimonji out to his side. The best place to start was to try and get in, and cut the wolf around the legs. If he could get it to drop lower, he could get to more vital parts. He could also just climb it, but he looked at his quickly approaching foe. Yeah, he didn't like the idea of trying to climb the monstrous beast. Only an idiot would do something that stupid. The wolf's eyes locked onto Zoro, sprinting his way back onto the battlefield, and it crouched down, as if preparing to pounce on his prey. Pounce it did. The massive animal leapt straight up into the air, and slammed all of his paws into the ground, as it landed, cracks rocketing outward, and toward the swordsman from the points of impact. Zoro pushed off his foot, and jumped into a roll to dodge out of the way of a crack that almost swallowed him whole. He was immediately back on his feet, once again sprinting his way toward his opponent, and trying not to let the fact that the beast was creating earthquakes faze him. Now he understood why the area and the clearing was so messed up. The massive wolf he was fighting had been jumping. He was almost within striking distance of his target when it suddenly jumped again, higher this time. The boy could only watch, as the beast flew out of his reach. It only occurred to him to run when he saw the massive form begin to descend. Shit. The swordsman sprinted out from under the animal's shadow, as fast as he could. He didn't even have time to look back before a massive boom sounded behind him. The shockwave blew Zoro forward, as if he'd been thrown, his body ragdolling, and rolling for several more yards after he landed. It was a miracle that he hadn't stabbed himself with his sword. Honestly, it was a miracle he managed to hold on to it at all. The boy groaned, as he rose from the ground. How the hell was he supposed to fight the thing if he couldn't even get close to it? He looked back in the direction of the wolf, and scowled when he saw it was back at the cave entrance. So it wasn't going to actively attack him. Interesting. Then it really was guarding something. He checked himself over for any injuries more serious than scrapes, and when he didn't find any, closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He needed to think. He hated thinking. He was more of a put your head down and do it kind of guy, but that was definitely going to get him killed if he tried it here. Suddenly, an idea popped into Zoro's head. Saul had once mentioned that he knew of a whole group of people in the Navy that use moves that seemed superhuman. He called them the Six Powers or something like that. One of them he'd mentioned was the Rankyaku if he remembered correctly. It was supposedly a flying slash of some sort. It was also the one giving him a crazy idea. Maybe the old man had been trying to help him more than he realized. At the time, Zoro shook the blacksmith's words off, not really believing them, but now he realized how foolish that had been. He was just so used to things being normal that he defaulted to thinking that impossible stuff didn't exist. He needed to stop that. Luffy had already shown him some impossible stuff, and the giant wolf was really selling the whole point. No longer would he be surprised by things of impossible nature. It was a promise to himself. Bringing himself back to the matter at hand, the swordsman opened his eyes. He was going to try and give his own version of the Rankyaku a shot. If it didn't work well, he'd only look stupid for a little bit. If it did work, he'd figure that out when the time came. Zoro approached the wolf once again, and stopped when he felt he was a short enough distance away. The beast made no move to attack, staring at him from its place at the entrance to the peculiar cave. The teen stared back for a moment before closing his eyes, and imagining what he wanted in his mind. He would need to use every ounce of strength he had for one slash. As he raised Wado Ichimonji above his head, grasped in both hands, Zoro felt it almost begin to vibrate. It looked like he was on the right track. He didn't know exactly what he was doing, but now that he believed he could do it, half the battle was already won. The swordsman breathed in deeply, his eyes still closed, before snapping them open, a grunt of exertion leaving his mouth. His katana came down in an overhead arc so fast, the blade created its very own slightly purple-colored slash. The projectile sped through the air at dazzling speeds toward its target, who'd begun to growl, as soon as the swordsman raised his sword. Just when it looked as if the air blade would surely hit, the massive beast's image disappeared, the slash continuing on its trajectory toward the wall of the cave. Without the wolf blocking its path, the flying slash hit the rock, and bounced off, redirecting into the ground, and creating a massive gouge at the earth. Zoro didn't even have time to celebrate the fact that he had successfully used his sword to create a projectile, as he was suddenly covered in shadow. He turned immediately, and came face to face with his opponent. He had no idea how it had managed to move so fast, as big as it was, but he didn't really have time to think about it. The beast's massive paw came down with blinding speed, and Zoro managed to dodge being squashed by inches. Taking his chance, the swordsman threw as many slashes as he could at the leg he'd managed to dodge, blood splashing with each swipe of his sword, and beginning to cover the ground beneath his feet. The wolf howled and reared back on its hind legs, escaping the bite of his blade momentarily, and Zoro took the chance to dash away from the beast to attempt another flying slash. As soon as he was out of range of the wolf, he turned and swiped his sword through the air with one hand. Nothing came from his katana shit. The wolf was back on all fours and quickly moving towards Zoro once more. It looked angry. He grabbed the hilt of Wado Ichimonji with his other hand and desperately slashed through the air again. Unlike before, the movement was accompanied by a flying purple slash made of razor-sharp air. The purple arc glimmered as it flew, and once again the huge animal disappeared from Zoro's vision. The teen turned as fast as he could, sheathing his katana, before flashing forward to behind where the large animal now stood. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Rick. Zoro spoke, the sound of a blade clicking into its sheath echoing round the clearing, lion's song. The loudest roar of the night erupted from the black wolf, as red spurted all around its paws. Zoro had managed to cut somewhat deeply around the inside of all four of its legs. Might not be able to move as fast now. He thought to himself, immediately drawing Wado Ichimonji again, and preparing to send yet another flying slash toward his opponent. The swordsman brought his katana down once more, and another purple arc materialized along with the wind pressure of his swing. Even though the beast was able to move its head in time, it did not vanish like before, the slash hitting the left side of its neck, and leaving a large bleeding gouge. Well, large to any normal-sized human being. More like a pinprick to the monster Zoro was currently faced with. However, it seemed the beast really didn't like the pain, because it was roaring something fierce. It must have been a fairly deep cut. Zoro ran at the beast once more. The swordsman had only wanted to take advantage of the wolf's distraction. However, it would lead to his downfall. As soon as he began moving, the creature burst forward. The image of a paw that screamed death consumed Zoro's vision, and he held his sword in front of him in a futile attempt at blocking some of the damage he was sure to take. Vicious pain erupted across the swordsman's body, as the paw slammed into him, sending his body flying across the clearing. He was definitely going to be hurting after this if he even lived. The boy rolled and rolled and rolled until he eventually came to a stop, his form lying still. He grimaced, pain shooting all throughout his body. There were definitely some things broken. He shifted slightly, and hissed to himself. Scratch that. There were a lot of things broken. The teen raised his head to look at what the monster wolf was doing, his body severely protesting the movement. It was beginning to approach, and it looked scary to say the least. He must have really made it mad. Its face was stuck in a permanent snarl that made it look as if it wanted to devour him whole. It was very different from the image of the statuesque guardian he saw before he'd attacked. He groaned as he pulled himself to his knees and slowly made his way to his feet, watching the massive animals approach. He wasn't happy about almost being done in after just one hit, but come on. Look at the size of the thing. He finally got all the way to his feet, standing stock still as the beast came closer. Once it stood over him, Zoro looked at it directly in its massive white eyes. I ain't going down without a fight. It might have been the wrong thing to say. The beast roared and opened its maw in another attempt to eat the swordsman. You already tried that once. You oversized mutt, Zoro yelled, and grasped Wado Ichimonji, as if preparing to stab it into the ground. The ground in the current situation being the roof of the wolf's mouth. Just as the massive jaws began to close and Zoro prepared to strike, he heard a loud voice. Alright forest guy. As cool as you are, I'm still gonna beat you up and take your treasure. An old man told me to, so I gotta. The boom sounded throughout the clearing, and the beast that almost sent Zoro to the afterlife was rocketed across the clearing. The swordsman could only gape as the large form about to swallow him whole landed from its flight and rolled not unlike he had moments earlier. Zoro! A voice exclaimed in surprise. Said teen turned in the direction of the voice and almost fell from the shock. Luffy, what the hell are you doing here? No thoughts went through Luffy's mind as he and the pack raced toward their destination. Thinking would only make him slower. They were running at an even faster pace than before after hearing loud booms, like the sounds of cannon fire, coming from the direction in which they were headed. Luffy focused all the energy he had into his legs and felt his enhancement spread through them. He needed to go faster than he was right now. Why he hadn't thought of it sooner he could think later. He had to get to the girl. She was gonna take his treasure. She might also be in danger, but that was secondary. Wait. I'm going ahead. I think I can find the way from here. He yelled to his companion, already bounding ahead of the group of wolves. His enhanced legs helped him increase his speed by a good margin, and Luffy's form began to blur through the forest as he made his way to the place where the cannon-like booms were coming from. The tree line of the area he was looking for quickly came into view, and he wasted no time sprinting through it. Coming into the large clearing, Luffy saw something that he wished he had more time to admire. It was just that cool. A dark black wolf, the size of which he'd never seen, stood with its mouth open, as if to eat something off the ground. The boy had seen plenty of large animals before, but nothing as large as the wolf. It must be the forest guy he was looking for. As much as he wanted to stop and admire the animal, he didn't. The wolf was about to chomp down on something, and when he looked closer, Luffy thought he could see a human form in between its open jaws. The black-haired teen raced toward who he thought was the orange-haired girl he'd met in the pond. She wasn't gonna die on his watch. He still had to get mad at her for being a liar. He didn't even really care about the lying, he just really wanted the treasure she was trying to steal from him. Peepers sure were sneaky. He would just have to get the treasure first. To do that, he had to beat the massive wolf in front of him. He was definitely gonna have to give it all he had. Just look at how big it was. It was as big as a huge building. Luffy brought his hardening to his knuckles, gray-black immediately forming on his hand in response to his will. He was getting better. He'd been practicing his armament for the entire time he had been with White, and almost didn't even need to think about it now. He could even enhance, and use what he had decided to call armament hardening at the same time. Little did he know, he'd chosen its actual name. He didn't know exactly how long he'd been in the forest, but he did know that he was glad he had the time to practice. The straw-hatted boy had practiced bringing the black forth, as well as holding it, every day. On some of those days, White and her pack had to hunt by themselves because Luffy couldn't move from using too much armament Haki. It was never very fun. Now though, not only could he summon his hardening faster, he could also use it for longer. Alright forest guy. As cool as you are, I'm still gonna beat you up and take your treasure. An old man told me to, so I gotta, Luffy yelled as he jumped in the middle of his stride, his form blurring through the air. In the time it took to travel to his target, Luffy had pulled back his hardened knuckles and loaded every ounce of strength he had into his arm. The boy's first shot forward like a cannon and connected with its target. The large boom echoed in the air, and Luffy's hand sunk into the fur of the massive wolf, his side rippling from the impact. As if hit by a speeding train, the building-sized animal flew through the air in an almost straight line. When it finally landed, its massive body rolled more than a few times before stopping, its form stilling. Luffy let his hardening fade and landed on his feet. His eyes met the back of the person he had saved from the big bad wolf, and they widened. Zoro. The green-haired teen whirled around, and a look of shock overcame his face. Luffy, what the hell are you doing here? Luffy didn't even think before answering. He was so excited to see his friend. An old guy told me to come and beat this thing up and get its treasure, he replied, excitedly. Zoro paused for a moment, taking in his words. An old guy told you to come here, beat that thing, and take whatever it's guarding? Zoro asked, incredulously. Yep, sounds about right. Luffy replied, a smile on his face. He had really liked the old guy. Laughter burst through the swordsman's lips, and even, as the sound left his mouth, he held his body in pain. Only you could get convinced by an old man to go into a forest to look for treasures, Zoro groaned, laughing through the grinding of the broken bones in his body. The straw-hatted boy watched his friend, a tick mark forming on his head. Well, why the hell are you here then? It was Zoro's fault that he was even out here in the first place. He said he wanted to be alone. The green-haired boy reined in his laughter, and answered, still chuckling slightly, an old guy told me to come cut down a tree. Damn it. Luffy immediately broke into laughter, roles reversing, as Zoro scowled at him. Stupid Zoro. You can't cut down these trees. I know that already, idiot. Zoro screamed with sharp teeth. He immediately paused, and looked bashfully off to the side. I know that now at least. Luffy continued to laugh, and Zoro apparently had decided to just wait it out, a scowl on his face. The younger boy held his stomach in humor-induced pain, that is just odd. The conversation was interrupted by a howl coming from the far side of the clearing. Both Zoro and Luffy looked to see the wolf sitting at the mouth of its cave, eyes seemingly locked onto Luffy, as if urging him to come forth and challenge him. Though, the said, tracing the beast's gaze to his target, it obviously wants to fight you. Luffy looked at his battered friend, and nodded toward him, you gonna be okay? They looked to be pretty beaten up. Kind of black and blue all over, really. Luffy was definitely gonna get in a few punches for his friend. Yeah, I'll be fine. I might have been able to win if I really had to. But now that you're here I'll just let you handle it. I need to sit down anyway, he replied, hunching slightly in pain. Alright. It's time to get my treasure. No way I'm letting that girl get it first. Luffy exclaimed, as he sped off into battle. Zoro tried to say something, as the boy left, already hardening his knuckles once again, but Luffy was so excited about the fight he was about to have, and the treasure he was going to find that he didn't hear. The straw-hatted boy's black eyes met the milky white of the forest lord's. Huh. They looked kind of like White's eyes to him. Only these were white, and hers were black. Weird. The beast stood to all fours, preparing to meet its foe halfway. There was a hint of something on its face. It almost looked like excitement. Luffy's steps were more like leaps, as he approached the massive wolf, closing the distance in seconds, while the beast mirrored him with its own huge steps. The boy wasted no time, not even thinking before he leapt toward the forest lord, brandishing his hardened knuckles. The wolf wasn't as fast now, with the cuts Zoro had inflicted previously slowing it down, but it still had enough mobility to leap out of Luffy's way. As the boy sailed through empty air, a giant paw slammed into his back, sending him back down to the earth like a bullet. The straw-hatted boy groaned from his position buried in the ground, but moved just quickly enough to dodge a second paw that would have smashed him flat. It was a good thing he'd been enhancing, the blow may have broken him otherwise. Luffy scrambled through the legs of the wolf, dodging left and right as it continued to try and crush him. He shifted just in time to avoid yet another massive paw slamming into the ground, and saw his chance. He'd been holding his hardening for a good opportunity, and one had finally come. He reared his arm back, and shot it toward the gash in the wolf's leg in the blink of an eye. The beast howled in pain, as the punch pierced through its wound like butter. Luffy pulled his bloody fist out, and replaced it with his other one, continuing back and forth like a Gatling gun. The boy's fists blurred, as he inflicted as much damage as he could at that moment. It was short-lived, however, as the Lord of the Forest leapt into the air with a howl. Thinking quickly, Luffy grabbed the animal's fur and joined it in its flight. As the midnight black form sailed through the air, he hung on tightly, the crazy idea forming in his head. The wind began to die down when the two opponents neared the point at which they would begin to fall back to the earth below, and the straw-hatted boy took his chance. He began scaling the beast, enhancing his legs to make the process faster. When he reached the wolf's back, he immediately bent, and put all of his strength into launching himself into the air, as the wolf began its descent. Luffy rocketed higher and higher until he reached his own apex where he turned, and finally noticed how high he was. He could even see Zoro from up there. Speaking of Zoro, he still needed to punch for his guy. It looked as if he was floating in the air for a moment before he, too, began to fall back to the earth. The boy could only scream in joy, as his eyes gazed at the descending black form below him. With his target in sight, Luffy enhanced the majority of his body, and dove, a hand bearing 4 hardened knuckles leading the way. The Lord of the Forest landed first with a loud boom, a shower of debris exploding into the air, and the straw-hatted boy was not far behind. He began to gather on Luffy's fist, as the air rushed by his face. He never moved faster in his life, only just barely being able to process his surroundings at the speed he was going. At the same time, it made it kind of nice that the wolf was so big. Larger targets were easier to hit. Well, in his experience at least. Alright, forest guy. This one's for hurting my friend. The straw-hatted boy screamed before connecting with his target. The second boom sounded throughout the air above, and the earth shattered below, Luffy's fist blasting into the back of the black wolf, faster than an actual cannon. The beast's form rippled and buckled as it was buried into the ground, the momentum Luffy was carrying pushing it deeper and deeper into the earth. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.